Marcus sat on a worn cardboard box at the corner of 5th and Main, his eyes reflecting a mix of desperation and weariness. The bustling city moved around him, but he remained still, a fixture in the urban landscape that most passers-by chose to ignore. His clothes were tattered and grimy, telling the silent story of nights spent on unforgiving streets. Despite his dire circumstances, Marcus wasn't alone. A motley crew of stray dogs surrounded him, their tails wagging and eyes bright with affection. There was an old mutt with patches of fur missing, a scraggly terrier mix with one ear flopped over, and a lean, alert German shepherd. These canine companions formed a stark contrast to Marcus's dejected demeanor, their joy and energy seeming out of place in the gritty city setting. Marcus reached into a plastic bag beside him, pulling out scraps of food he'd managed to scavenge. He tore a piece of stale bread into smaller chunks, offering them to the eager dogs. "Here you go, buddies," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. The dogs snatched up the offerings, their tails wagging even more vigorously. As he fed his furry friends, Marcus's face softened. He spoke to them in low tones, sharing the mundane details of his day as if they were old friends catching up over coffee. "Can you believe it, Max?" he said to the German shepherd. "I found a whole half sandwich in the dumpster behind that fancy deli. Looks like we're eating good tonight." The dogs listened attentively, their eyes fixed on Marcus as he spoke. It was clear that this daily ritual brought him a sense of peace and purpose. For a few moments, he wasn't just another homeless man on the street. He was needed, appreciated, even loved. A group of children on their way home from school walked by, their backpacks bouncing as they chattered excitedly. Some of them glanced curiously at Marcus and his canine entourage, whispering among themselves. Most hurried past, having been taught to avoid strangers, especially those living on the streets. One child, however, lingered behind the group. Emily, a girl of about 10 with pigtails and a bright yellow raincoat, couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene. She watched as Marcus gently stroked the terrier's scruffy fur, murmuring words of comfort to the animal. Emily's curiosity got the better of her. She took a tentative step closer, then another. Her friends called out to her, urging her to catch up, but she waved them on. "I'll be right there," she called back, her attention still fixed on Marcus and the dogs. Marcus noticed the girl's approach and tensed slightly. He was used to people avoiding him, sometimes even crossing the street to put distance between them. But this child seemed different. There was no fear in her eyes, only genuine interest. "Hi," Emily said, her voice small but clear. "What are their names?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the direct question. He cleared his throat before answering. "Well, this old fella here is Buddy," he said, patting the patchy mutt. "The little scrapper is Rusty, and this big guy is Max." Emily's face lit up with a smile. "Can I pet them?" Marcus nodded, watching carefully as Emily reached out to stroke Max's head. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, his tail thumping against the sidewalk. "They're really nice," Emily said, gaining confidence. "Do you take care of them?" Marcus chuckled softly. "I'd say we take care of each other, kid." This interaction marked a turning point. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt seen, not as a problem or a nuisance, but as a person. Emily's simple act of acknowledging him and his canine companions had cracked open a door that had long been closed. As Emily continued to pet the dogs and chat with Marcus, other children from her group noticed and slowly made their way back. Their initial wariness gave way to curiosity as they saw Emily's ease with the situation. Soon, a small crowd had gathered around Marcus and the dogs, filling the air with excited chatter and laughter. Marcus found himself at the center of attention, answering questions about the dogs and showing the children how to approach them gently. For a brief moment, the hardships of his life faded into the background, overshadowed by the simple joy of human connection. This scene on the street corner with a homeless man, a pack of stray dogs, and a group of curious children painted a picture of unexpected companionship and the breaking down of social barriers. It was a reminder that kindness and connection can flourish in the most unlikely places, bridging gaps between different worlds and bringing light to even the darkest corners of the city. The children's initial curiosity about Marcus and his dogs quickly evolved into a regular after-school ritual. Each day, a small group would gather around Marcus's corner, eager to hear his stories and play with the dogs. Marcus, initially reserved, gradually opened up to his young audience. One afternoon, as the children settled around him, Marcus began to share his story. "I wasn't always living on this street, you know," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of nostalgia and regret. The children leaned in, their eyes wide with interest. Marcus spoke of his past life, a modest but comfortable existence where he had a job, an apartment, and dreams of becoming an artist. He described how a series of unfortunate events, losing his job, a costly medical emergency, and a streak of bad luck, had led him to the streets. "Life can change quick, kids," he said, his weathered face serious. "One day you're on top of the world, the next you're wondering where your next meal's coming from." The children listened intently, their young minds grappling with the harsh realities Marcus described. Emily, who had first approached Marcus, asked, "But how did you end up with the dogs?" Marcus's face softened as he looked at his canine companions. "They found me, really. I guess lonely souls have a way of finding each other." He went on to tell them about each dog, how Max had been abandoned by his previous owners, how Rusty had been living in an alley behind a restaurant, and how old Buddy had been wandering the streets for years before joining their little group. As Marcus spoke, the children's perception of homelessness began to shift. They saw beyond the dirty clothes and unkempt appearance, recognizing the humanity in Marcus's story. His resilience in the face of adversity and his unconditional love for the dogs touched them deeply. Sensing the heaviness of the conversation, Marcus decided to lighten the mood. "Want to see something cool?" he asked, a glint in his eye. The children nodded eagerly. Marcus turned to Max, the German shepherd. "Max, sit!" he commanded. Max immediately obeyed, his tail wagging. "Now shake!" Marcus said, extending his hand. Max lifted his paw and placed it in Marcus's hand. The children clapped and laughed, delighted by the simple trick. Encouraged by their reaction, Marcus began to teach them how to train the dogs. He showed them how to use gentle commands and positive reinforcement, explaining the importance of patience and consistency. Soon the corner was filled with the sound of children's voices calling out commands and cheering when the dogs responded. Even shy Rusty, who usually kept his distance from strangers, began to warm up to the children's attention. Emily was particularly enthusiastic about learning to train the dogs. She worked diligently with Buddy, the old mutt, trying to teach him to roll over. Despite Buddy's reluctance, Emily persisted, her face a picture of concentration. As the children practiced with the dogs, Marcus watched with a mixture of pride and melancholy. For a moment, he could almost forget his current circumstances. The joy on the children's faces and the unconditional love of the dogs filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. However, the peaceful scene was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of a group of local teenagers. Led by a tall boy named Jake, they swaggered towards Marcus's corner, their faces twisted with disdain. "Well, well," Jake sneered. "Looks like the old bum's got himself a fan club." His friends snickered behind him, emboldened by their leader's mockery. The children fell silent, their earlier joy evaporating in the face of this new threat. Marcus straightened up, his body tense but his voice calm as he addressed the newcomers. "There's no trouble here, boys. Why don't you move along?" Jake's response was to pick up a small stone from the ground. With a cruel smile, he tossed it towards Max. The stone missed, but the intent was clear. The dogs began to growl, sensing the hostility. "Stop it!" Emily cried out, her small fists clenched at her sides. "Leave them alone!" Jake and his friends laughed, clearly amused by the little girl's outburst. "Oh, how cute! The freak show's got a little defender!" Jake taunted. Marcus stood up slowly, placing himself between the teenagers and the children. "That's enough," he said firmly. "These kids and dogs have done nothing to you. Walk away now." For a moment it seemed like Jake might back down, but then he scooped up another stone, larger this time. "Make me, old man," he challenged, pulling his arm back to throw. The tension on the corner reached a breaking point. The children huddled closer to Marcus and the dogs, fear evident on their faces. Marcus stood his ground, his eyes never leaving Jake's. The once peaceful afternoon had turned into a standoff, with Marcus and his unlikely family facing a threat that went beyond mere survival on the streets. This confrontation marked a turning point in the story, highlighting the challenges Marcus faced not just from his circumstances, but from the cruelty and prejudice of others. It also showcased the protective bond that had formed between Marcus, the dogs, and the children, a makeshift family united in the face of adversity. The standoff between Marcus and Jake's group lasted only moments, but to the children huddled behind Marcus, it felt like an eternity. Just as Jake was about to throw the second stone, a car horn blared loudly, startling everyone. A middle-aged woman leaned out of her car window, her face stern. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes darting between Jake and Marcus. Jake lowered his arm, the stone still clutched in his hand. "Nothing, ma'am," he muttered, suddenly aware of how the scene might look to an adult passerby. The woman parked her car and got out, approaching the group. "It didn't look like nothing to me," she said. "I saw you about to throw that rock. What's your name, young man?" Jake shuffled his feet, avoiding eye contact. "Jake," he mumbled. "Well, Jake, I suggest you and your friends leave now before I call the police," the woman said firmly. Jake glared at Marcus one last time before motioning to his friends. They skulked away, throwing dirty looks over their shoulders as they left. The woman turned to Marcus and the children. "Is everyone all right?" she asked, her voice softening. Marcus nodded. "Yes, thank you, ma'am. We appreciate your help." As the woman drove away after ensuring everyone was safe, the children began to process what had just happened. Emily, her voice shaking slightly, spoke up. "That was scary. Why were they being so mean?" Marcus sighed, sitting back down on his cardboard box. "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand," he explained gently, "and that fear can turn into anger or cruelty." The children listened intently, their young minds grappling with this harsh reality. Tommy, one of the older boys in the group, spoke up. "But that's not fair. You didn't do anything wrong." Marcus smiled sadly. "Life isn't always fair, Tommy. But what matters is how we choose to respond to unfairness." The incident had shaken the children, but it also ignited something in them. They began to see Marcus not just as an interesting character in their neighborhood, but as someone who needed protection and support. Emily, her face set with determination, declared, "We need to do something. We can't let those mean boys keep bothering you and the dogs." The other children nodded in agreement, their earlier fear replaced by a sense of purpose. They huddled together, whispering and planning, while Marcus watched with a mixture of concern and gratitude. Over the next few days, the children took action. They spoke to their parents, teachers, and neighbors about Marcus and the dogs. Many adults were surprised to learn about the homeless man who had been caring for stray animals and entertaining local children with stories and dog tricks. Some parents were initially concerned about their children spending time with a homeless man, but as they learned more about Marcus and saw how he interacted with the kids and dogs, their attitudes began to change. Sarah, a woman who had recently lost her job, became particularly interested in Marcus's story. She saw in him a reflection of her own fears about ending up on the street. One afternoon, she approached Marcus's corner, carrying a bag of dog food and some sandwiches. "I heard about what happened with those teenagers," Sarah said, handing Marcus the bag. "I thought you and your friends could use this." Marcus accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's not often people see us as worth helping." Sarah sat down on an empty crate near Marcus, watching as he distributed the food among the dogs. "The kids in the neighborhood speak very highly of you," she said. "They say you tell wonderful stories and that you've been teaching them about kindness to animals." Marcus shrugged, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. "These dogs saved me as much as I saved them. And the kids, well, they remind me that there's still good in the world." As they talked, Sarah learned more about Marcus's past, his dreams of being an artist, the series of misfortunes that led him to homelessness, and his deep bond with the stray dogs that had become his family. Moved by his story and impressed by his resilience, Sarah made a decision. "I want to help," she said firmly. "I'm not sure how yet, but there must be something we can do to improve your situation." Marcus looked at her, surprise and a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Just treating me like a human being is more help than you know," he said softly. Sarah's involvement marked a turning point. She began to rally other adults in the community, sharing Marcus's story and challenging their preconceptions about homelessness. She organized a neighborhood meeting to discuss how they could help Marcus and address the larger issue of homelessness in their community. The children, excited by the growing support for Marcus, continued their own efforts. They made posters about kindness to animals and the importance of helping others, hanging them around the neighborhood. They also started a pet food drive, collecting donations for Marcus to use for the dogs. As awareness grew, more people began to stop by Marcus's corner. Some brought food or supplies, while others simply wanted to talk and hear his stories. The corner that had once been a symbol of neglect was slowly transforming into a place of community and compassion. However, the increased attention also brought challenges. Jake and his friends, angry at being reprimanded, began to spread rumors about Marcus. They claimed he was dangerous, that he was using the dogs and children to scam people for money. These rumors created tension in the community. Some parents who had been supportive started to have doubts, worried about their children's safety. The local authorities, alerted by concerned citizens, began to pay more attention to Marcus's presence on the corner. Marcus found himself at the center of a community debate, his fate hanging in the balance as the neighborhood grappled with issues of compassion, safety, and social responsibility. The simple act of kindness by a group of children had snowballed into a movement that was forcing the entire community to confront its values and prejudices. As the community debate about Marcus and his presence on the corner intensified, Sarah and the children who had befriended him decided to take action. They proposed organizing a community event to raise awareness and funds for Marcus and the stray dogs he cared for. Sarah approached the local community center and secured permission to use their space for the event. She then rallied a group of volunteers to help with the planning and execution. The children, excited to be involved, took on the task of creating posters and flyers to advertise the event. On the day of the fundraiser, the community center buzzed with activity. Tables were set up with donated items for a silent auction, including artwork, home-baked goods, and services offered by local businesses. A corner was designated as a pet supply donation area, where people could bring food, leashes, and other items for the stray dogs. The event started slowly, with only a few curious neighbors trickling in. However, as word spread, more people began to arrive. Many were surprised to see Marcus there, clean-shaven and wearing donated clothes. He stood near the entrance, greeting people with a shy smile and thanking them for coming. Emily and her friends had set up a booth where they demonstrated some of the tricks Marcus had taught the dogs. Max, the German Shepherd, was a particular hit with his ability to shake hands and play dead. People gathered around, charmed by the well-behaved strays and impressed by the children's handling of them. As the event progressed, Sarah took the microphone to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here today not just to raise funds, but to raise awareness. Marcus and these dogs represent a part of our community that we often overlook. Today, we have a chance to change that." She then invited Marcus to speak. He hesitated at first, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. But as he began to talk about his experiences and his love for the dogs, his voice grew stronger. "These animals gave me a purpose when I had nothing else," he said. They showed me kindness when the rest of the world turned away. And then these children," he gestured to Emily and her friends, "they reminded me that there's still good in the world." Marcus's words resonated with the audience. Many were moved to tears, seeing for the first time the humanity behind the homeless man they had previously ignored or avoided. As Marcus finished speaking, he mentioned something that caught everyone by surprise. "Before I ended up on the streets, I used to dream of being an artist," he said. "I would spend hours sketching and painting, imagining my work hanging in galleries someday." This revelation sparked an idea in Sarah's mind. She quickly conferred with some of the other organizers, and then made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an opportunity here. Marcus has just shared with us his passion for art. What if we, as a community, could help him reconnect with that passion?" The suggestion was met with enthusiasm. One of the local shop owners offered to provide art supplies. A retired art teacher volunteered to give Marcus some refresher lessons. And the owner of a small gallery in town proposed the idea of hosting an exhibition of Marcus's work once he had created enough pieces. As the event wound down, it was clear that it had been a success. Not only had they raised a significant amount of money and collected numerous supplies for the dogs, but they had also changed the narrative around Marcus. He was no longer just the homeless man on the corner, but a member of the community with a story, talents, and dreams. The funds raised were enough to provide Marcus with temporary housing and to cover the costs of caring for the dogs. A local vet offered to provide checkups and necessary treatments for the strays at a discounted rate. In the days following the event, Marcus found himself adjusting to his new circumstances. He moved into a small furnished room above a local bookstore, whose owner had offered it at a reduced rent. The dogs were placed in foster homes, with Marcus able to visit them regularly. With a roof over his head and his basic needs met, Marcus began to focus on his art. He started with simple sketches, mostly of the dogs and the children who had befriended him. As he regained his confidence, he moved on to more complex pieces, drawing inspiration from his experiences on the streets. The community's support continued. People would stop by the bookstore to check on Marcus and offer encouragement. The children visited often, eager to see his latest creations and share stories about the dogs in their foster homes. However, not everyone was pleased with these developments. Jake and his group of troublemakers felt they had been unfairly vilified. They resented the attention and support Marcus was receiving, viewing it as a threat to their status in the neighborhood. As Marcus prepared for his first art show, scheduled to take place at the local gallery in a few weeks, tensions in the community began to rise once again. The story of the homeless man and his journey was far from over, and the upcoming exhibition would prove to be a pivotal moment for Marcus and the entire neighborhood. As Marcus settled into his new living situation and focused on his art, his relationship with Sarah deepened. She became a frequent visitor to his small room above the bookstore, often bringing supplies or just offering company and encouragement. One afternoon, Sarah arrived to find Marcus hunched over a large canvas, his brow furrowed in concentration. "How's it going?" she asked, setting down a bag of groceries she had brought. Marcus looked up, a smudge of paint on his cheek. "It's challenging," he admitted. "I'm trying to capture what it felt like, you know? The loneliness, the despair, but also the moments of unexpected kindness." Sarah moved closer to examine the painting. It depicted a street corner at night, illuminated by a single street lamp. In the pool of light stood a solitary figure surrounded by shadowy shapes that resembled dogs. The painting was raw and emotional, conveying a sense of isolation and resilience. "It's powerful, Marcus," Sarah said softly. "You're really capturing the essence of your experiences." Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the canvas. "I want people to see, to understand. Not just about me, but about all the invisible people out there." Over the next few weeks, Sarah helped Marcus create more pieces for his upcoming exhibition. She would sit with him for hours, listening as he explained the stories behind each painting. Sometimes she would share her own experiences of job loss and financial insecurity, finding common ground with Marcus despite their different circumstances. As they worked together, Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to Marcus's quiet strength and artistic sensitivity. She admired his resilience and the way he had maintained his compassion despite the hardships he had faced. Meanwhile, the community's efforts to confront Jake and his friends about their behavior were ongoing. A group of concerned parents, led by Emily's mother, had organized a meeting with Jake's parents and the school principal. The meeting was tense, with Jake's parents initially defensive about their son's actions. However, as they heard more about the impact of Jake's behavior on Marcus and the community, their attitude began to shift. "We had no idea it had gone this far," Jake's father said, looking troubled. "We'll have a serious talk with Jake about this." The principal proposed a restorative justice approach. Instead of just punishing Jake and his friends, what if we had them work on a community service project, she suggested. Something that might help them understand the consequences of their actions and develop empathy. The idea was met with cautious approval from both sides. It was decided that Jake and his friends would help at the local animal shelter, working with abandoned and abused animals. The hope was that this experience would teach them compassion and responsibility. However, when Jake learned of this decision, his resentment only grew. He saw it as another example of how Marcus had disrupted his life. "This is all that bum's fault," he muttered to his friends. "We need to teach him a lesson." As the day of Marcus's art exhibition approached, excitement built in the community. The local newspaper ran a feature story on Marcus, detailing his journey from homelessness to budding artist. The article sparked interest beyond the neighborhood, with people from other parts of the city expressing interest in attending the show. The night before the exhibition, Marcus worked late, putting the finishing touches on his paintings. Sarah stayed with him, helping to frame the pieces and prepare them for display. As they worked, Marcus opened up about his fears. "What if no one likes them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if this is all a mistake?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Marcus, your art is beautiful and meaningful. It's going to touch people. You've already overcome so much. This is your moment to shine." Marcus looked at her, gratitude and something deeper shining in his eyes. Impulsively, he leaned in and kissed her softly on the cheek. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." Sarah blushed, surprised but not displeased by the gesture. The moment was interrupted by a noise outside, the sound of breaking glass. They rushed to the window to see a group of hooded figures running away from the gallery across the street. The front window had been smashed, and spray painted across the building were the words, "No bums allowed." Marcus's face fell as he realized what had happened. "It's Jake and his friends," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "They're not going to let this go." Sarah's expression hardened with determination. "We're not going to let them win, Marcus. The exhibition will go on, no matter what." As they stood there looking at the vandalized gallery, both Marcus and Sarah knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The exhibition now represented more than just Marcus's art. It had become a symbol of the community's struggle to embrace change and compassion. The events of the coming day would test not only Marcus's resilience, but the community's commitment to supporting him. The morning of the exhibition dawned with a mix of tension and excitement. News of the vandalism had spread quickly through the neighborhood, and community members rallied to help. By sunrise, a group of volunteers had already gathered at the gallery, armed with cleaning supplies and determination. Marcus arrived early, his face etched with worry. He found Sarah directing the cleanup efforts, her voice calm but firm as she organized the volunteers. "Marcus," she called out when she saw him, "don't worry, we're going to make this work." As they cleaned up the broken glass and painted over the graffiti, Marcus couldn't shake his unease. "Maybe this is all too much," he said to Sarah in a quiet moment. "I'm putting everyone through so much trouble. Perhaps it would be better if I just disappeared again." Sarah turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Don't you dare think like that, Marcus. You matter. Your art matters. And we're not letting a bunch of misguided kids ruin this for you or for the community." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emily and her friends. The children had brought flowers and handmade signs to decorate the gallery entrance. "We're here to help, Mr. Marcus," Emily announced, her young face determined. Seeing the children's enthusiasm, Marcus felt a surge of resolve. He picked up a paintbrush and joined the efforts to restore the gallery facade. As he worked, he realized that this act of communal support was itself a form of art, a living testament to the power of compassion and unity. By mid-afternoon, the gallery was ready. The marks of vandalism had been erased, replaced by colorful flowers and welcome signs. Inside, Marcus's paintings were displayed prominently, each one telling a part of his story. As the opening time approached, Marcus retreated to a quiet corner of the gallery. The reality of exposing his art, and by extension his soul, to public scrutiny was overwhelming. Sarah found him there, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his donated suit jacket. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Sarah took his hands in hers, steadying them. "You've already done the hard part, Marcus. You've created something beautiful out of pain. Now it's time to share it with the world." Just then, Max, the German shepherd who had been Marcus's constant companion on the streets, arrived with his foster family. The dog immediately went to Marcus, pressing his nose into the man's hand. Marcus knelt down, burying his face in Max's fur for a moment. "You're right," he said as he stood up, scratching Max behind the ears. "I'm not alone in this." As the doors opened and people began to file in, Marcus stood tall, ready to greet the visitors. The gallery quickly filled with a diverse crowd, neighbors, art enthusiasts, and even a few local reporters. Marcus moved from painting to painting, explaining his work and sharing his experiences with attentive listeners. One of his most powerful pieces, a large canvas depicting a huddle of stray dogs protecting a sleeping figure on a park bench, drew particular attention. "I called it unconditional," Marcus explained to a group gathered around the painting, "because these animals, they don't judge, they just love." As the evening progressed, Marcus began to relax, buoyed by the positive responses to his work. Several pieces sold, with the proceeds split between Marcus and a fund for helping the local homeless population. However, the night wasn't without tension. Midway through the event, Jake and his friends were spotted lurking outside the gallery. They didn't attempt to enter, but their presence was a reminder of the hostility that still existed. Sarah noticed them first and quietly alerted the volunteer security team that had been organized for the event. As she watched the boys from inside, she saw a mixture of anger and curiosity on their faces as they peered through the windows at the bustling gallery. For a moment, Sarah considered inviting them in, wondering if exposure to Marcus's art might change their perspective. But before she could act on the thought, the boys disappeared into the night. As the exhibition wound down, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers and potential patrons. A local art collector expressed interest in featuring Marcus's work in a larger city gallery. A community college representative offered him a chance to speak to art students about his journey. Overwhelmed by the support and opportunities, Marcus sought out Sarah in the crowd. When he found her, he simply took her hand, unable to put his gratitude into words. As the last guests left and the gallery grew quiet, Marcus, Sarah, and a few close friends gathered around the unconditional painting. Max lay at Marcus's feet, a living embodiment of the loyalty depicted in the artwork. "What happens now?" one of the volunteers asked. Marcus looked around at the faces of those who had stood by him, then down at Max, and finally at his paintings that told the story of his struggles and triumphs. "Now," he said softly, "we keep moving forward, together." The exhibition had been a success, but Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and challenges. As he locked up the gallery that night, he realized that his journey had taken an unexpected turn. From a forgotten corner of the city to the center of a community's attention, Marcus had found not just a new beginning for himself, but had become a catalyst for change in the lives of those around him. The days following the exhibition were a whirlwind of activity and emotion for Marcus. The success of the show had brought him unexpected attention, both positive and negative. While many in the community celebrated his triumph, others, including Jake and his group, continued to view Marcus's newfound prominence with resentment and suspicion. One evening, about a week after the exhibition, Marcus was walking Max near his old corner. Despite his improved circumstances, he still felt drawn to the place where his journey had begun. As they approached, Marcus noticed a group of people gathered there. To his surprise, he saw Emily and several other children from the neighborhood, along with their parents and other community members. Emily spotted him first. "Mr. Marcus," she called out, waving enthusiastically, "we're having a vigil." As Marcus drew closer, he saw that the group had set up candles and was holding signs with messages like "Compassion for All" and "Our Community Cares." Sarah emerged from the crowd, a warm smile on her face. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, overwhelmed by the scene before him. Sarah explained, "After the vandalism at the gallery, we decided we needed to make a statement. We're here to show that this corner isn't just a place of hardship anymore. It's a symbol of our community's commitment to kindness and support for all our members." The group had organized a small ceremony. They shared stories about how Marcus and his experiences had impacted their lives and perspectives. One by one, people stepped forward to light candles, each flame representing a commitment to compassion and understanding. As the vigil continued, Marcus noticed movement at the edge of the gathering. Jake and his friends had arrived, watching the proceedings with a mix of curiosity and defiance. The adults tensed, ready for potential trouble, but Marcus made a decision. He approached the group of teenagers, Max at his heels. "Would you like to join us?" he asked, his voice calm and inviting. Jake looked surprised, then suspicious. "Why would you want us there? After everything?" Marcus met Jake's gaze steadily. "Because this isn't about sides. It's about understanding each other. Your voice matters in this community too." For a moment it seemed like Jake might refuse, but then, to everyone's surprise, he gave a small nod. "Okay," he said quietly, "but just for a minute." As Jake and his friends cautiously joined the gathering, a ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Sarah moved to Marcus's side, giving his hand a supportive squeeze. The vigil continued with Marcus invited to speak. He looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, friends and former adversaries alike, and felt a surge of emotion. "A few months ago I was invisible on this corner," he began. "Now I stand here surrounded by people who have shown me the true meaning of community. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us recognizing the humanity in each other, no matter our circumstances." As Marcus spoke, he noticed Jake listening intently, the boy's usual bravado replaced by a thoughtful expression. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, the flickering candles casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd. As people began to disperse, Jake approached Marcus. I'm sorry," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For everything. I didn't understand." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the apology. "Thank you, Jake. That takes courage." As Jake turned to leave, Marcus called out, "You know, the animal shelter could always use more volunteers if you're interested." Jake paused, then gave a small nod before walking away with his friends. The vigil had done more than just make a statement. It had begun the process of healing the rifts in the community. As the last of the candles were extinguished, Sarah turned to Marcus. "You know, this corner could use something permanent," she mused. "Something to remind everyone of what happened here." Marcus's eyes lit up. "A mural," he said. "We could create a mural that tells this story." The idea quickly gained traction. Over the next few days, plans were made to transform the once neglected corner into a symbol of community and redemption. Marcus would lead the project, working with local artists and students to design and paint the mural. As word of the project spread, offers of support poured in. The hardware store donated paint and supplies. The city council expedited the necessary permits. Even Jake and his friends volunteered to help, eager to be part of something positive in the community. The mural project became a catalyst for further change. Discussions began about establishing a permanent outreach program for the homeless in their area. The animal shelter saw an increase in volunteers and adoptions. The community that had once been divided was now coming together with a shared sense of purpose. For Marcus, it was a profound transformation. The corner that had once been his lowest point was now becoming a testament to hope and the power of community. As he sketched out designs for the mural, Max lounging at his feet, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. He was no longer just surviving, he was thriving and helping others to do the same.